Super. Thank you very much. My name is Lech Muszynski. I'm coming from Oregon State University, although the accent would not tell you that. The topic for today is the global outlook on what happens with CLT industry. I think we are quite often carried away with the sense of novelty that CLT is on this continent or in this country particularly, but it's very easy to lose the larger perspective and the context in which what happens in here is being developed. A word about co-authors. This Global CLT Survey is a project. We are in the institution where high personal turnout is the measure of our success. So the first, the names in white are co-authors of the first survey cycle. The names in gold are the members that came on board to execute the two other iterations of the survey. Now, the motivation is to assist the development of CLT industry. And at first we were defining this, helping the development of the industry just here in the United States or on the continent. But generally, if you think of utility of this, looking in this big mirror, I think it goes beyond that. And our perspective on the industry is, what is the structure of the companies? What is the output potential? What is the production profile, internal diversity, competitiveness, or perceived competitiveness or competitive edge, and approaches to innovativeness and perceived barriers for further expansion? Of course, everybody wants to be right there in the near future, right? So we are trying to provide some background for this. So the project has been conducted in stages. Actually, the first stages that we've done, we didn't even know we are on the trajectory towards a global survey. It started with the literature review, random walk of the speaker through lots of CLT manufacturing plants, including you guys, a couple times. Right, asking funny questions until we started to realize that we are coming up with a body of knowledge, and that this perspective gives us some meta level of understanding of what's going on with the industry. Now, the first global survey was completed on the shoestring. The surveys have been sent out in 2016, harvested in 2016. Took us about a year to publish this thing. Then nice thing has happened. We got funded by the Tollwood Design Institute, and this allows us to conduct the second helping of the survey. This is about to launch. We have everything prepared for this. The third survey is planned for spring of 2019, and then we also have funding for more targeted, less random regional market tours. I'll explain this if we have time. If we don't, I'll gladly skip this. So one is already completed, the CLT Tour de France, lots of fun, in August 2017. And the one that we are about to do this August is the Pacific Rim, where we are going to take a look at the CLT industry in Japan, in Australia, and New Zealand. And beyond this funding, we plan to follow up and make it into an institution. I need to be careful not to say institutionalize it, right? But make it into an institution and go on with in perpetuity for as long as the industry is going to provide us with news and exciting things to talk about. So essentially, at the end of this 2016 survey, we have the publication out, and it will be, but I consider it as being like a dual thing to go over a publication in a conference setting. So for this presentation, I'm going to merge it with things that we've learned in between, with the outcomes of the Tour de France and what we are learning about sources and so on. So speaking of sources, the survey is just one part of it. We've got a response rate. We've sent out the survey to 41 businesses that we believed back then constituted like all companies that produce cross-laminated timber proved not to be very true. We got 21 responses, which, as for any person who does surveys, would say that's fabulous, but we were hoping for much more, for greater interest. So the survey is supplemented by information from the trade literature, the most prominent, not the only one, being the Holz Courier, or you may know it as Timber Online, field trips, and other gossips. And yes. So things to understand about the sources of information. For instance, the trade journals, right? They were doing the biannual survey of global CLT industry, but it would always happen so that the focus would be actually on the alpine region of Europe rather than the globe. And although there would be news of openings here and there outside of this region, most of the quantitative information would come right from the core where everything started. And then the definition of what are the limits of the alpine region would be somewhat fluent between one report and the other. So you see the fluctuation of the companies being reported between anything between 15 to 24 at some point, where some of the processors or some of other companies dealing with mass timber would be confused for CLT manufacturers. But this is okay. I mean, trade journals have the license for doing these things, right? It's at university, we have like somewhat stringent, more stringent standards to measure up to. And plus, this was fabulous source of information where things are happening. And I like recycling this slide because it shows something. There's something to the alpine region, right? You see the contour of Oregon being implemented. This is where, until recently, about 85% of global CLT production would be coming. Right now, it may be still about 70% of the volume is coming out of this region. With the new developments, including Catera here, right, 120,000 cubic meters a year, including new developments for Stora Enso in Sweden and so on. This is like the slice is shrinking. There are also other sources of information, including licensed reports. But licensed reports with all the strings attached are very difficult to discuss in public, so we won't. Although we are using this data in a way consistent with the licenses. Now, where we are with the global output right now. So you see this exponential curve based on data gathered by other people. The one red dot in here, I'm hesitating because I have a history of pressing the wrong button for the, I'll better do it, you know. Now you won't see which button is the laser? You would think an academic person should know that, right? But for years now, I'm going away from the slideshows in my classrooms. I'm doing like discussion and waving my hands, and so I'm losing contact with the technology. So this red point would be my own or our own data point in this research at a certain point here in 2013-14, our assessment. Now, many believe that in 2015 we have already globally crossed the 1 million mark. And I'm not dismissing this. It's just, I'll show you how we go about verifying this thing. So the 1 million cubic meters may be kind of abstract number for some of you. So this would be equivalent of 35 million cubic foot or 425 million of board feet of a material. We are on the trajectory. If the curve is true, we are on trajectory to meet the about 2 million mark by 2020, right? The recent announcement would make you believe we are going close. Now, this is the way we are going about it. So we are in the business of verifying this data. So this would be, this big box would be equivalent to scale. Here would be a scale that is 10,000 cubic meters, right? So this is what some believe the global production is right now or was in 2015. This much we could put together when we combine the most recent trade journal numbers together. So it's to scale. Then that much we could confirm in our survey, but this was first survey. Did not know if we will be trading with the company secrets. So companies were kind of skittish about sharing the information about the production output, but in the already available literature, we could, for the surveyed companies, confirm that much. Of course, all of these data sources overlap some, and it leaves a slim margin, about 330,000 cubic meters that may be not accounted for. And I'm not saying it's not out there, because there is not a month that I would not learn about some development that somehow was outside of our radar screen, right? So this volume, this capacity may be somewhere in there. Now, it's quite often referred to as plywood on steroids, right? The cross-laminated timber. So this is a perspective on this. This again, to the scale, a box that is representing this 1 million cubic meter of CLT. And that's the global, a box representing to the same scale global production. Quite often it escapes us that this is still a boutique industry compared to other forest products, staples. Okay, so this is important perspective on this, because I would make a case that even 20-something years after the launching first commercial CLT, this is a still very young industry. Young does not mean immature. Young meaning like vigorous and still in the process of growing, right, and finding its way. So let's see how this volume is being parsed between manufacturers of different sizes. One thing that is coming immediately apparent is the great diversity in the scale of operation. So here the bars represent the volume, the collective output volume for these categories, below 10,000 cubic meter, and the numbers represent the number of companies that we could trace or identify with this level of output. So you see there is like plenty of small manufacturers working alongside these big giants and finding their niche and not perishing, not complaining, right? This is still viable model. Lots of manual labor in here, very low threshold for launching a thing like this. And then the few very major player above 30,000 cubic meters a year, right? Now there's this valley of tier. This is where you have to make a decision. I mean, this is like a little too much for your manual labor and not enough to justify heavy automatization investment, right? So this is how it looks like. Although, it's changing, right? Every year we hear new announcements. Announcements may be taken with the grain of salt, but then there are companies that put equipment on the ground. And that's beyond the announcement. So in terms of the volume comes at a price. These are now stripped from the names of the companies. Anecdotal information on the cost of launching a CLT operation from scratch. I mean, not spinned off some existing glulam operation, but from scratch. It would be like for 10,000 cubic meters a shift a year. This is capacity, not necessarily the actual output. It was in 2012 about 10,000 euros, which would translate to about 13,000. This should be millions. Not thousands, sorry. Delete the case in your mind, replace them with millions, right? That would be very cheap, yeah. So in all of this, right? I was just replacing zeros. And so these are millions, right? 30 million of dollars of 2012. 20,000 cubic meters of per shift capacity would be about twice as much. And now the recent announcement in New Zealand, they claim that they are going to spend about 20 million of New Zealand dollars. This would be like for about 15 million of US dollars for a facility that has an annual capacity of 50,000 cubic meter, although there is no word whether this is per shift or a total, right? So this is how it looks like. Now, there is appetite for growth, and this is coming from responses from existing companies, so it does not include information of startups that did not produce anything like CLT at the time where we are asking these questions, right? So almost everyone wants to expand. These are no responses, right? So we don't know what are their plans. These are no increase planned. But then there would be most of the companies asked would say, we plan to increase within 12 months. And it's consistent with what we are hearing even now. So this was in 2016. Now, how they are planning to increase the production would be, well, at shifts, it's a no-brainer. Most of the companies, because this is a custom-based, it's not a commodity industry, it's custom-based, they are happy to have the capacity for large projects, but most of the time they're operating at about one shift level. So the easy no-brainer way of increasing capacity is just adding shifts when you need it. Now, increase efficiency, that's an easy answer. Everybody can answer this. But more important is installing new equipment, adding new line. Well, that's a major investment, right? And building new entirely new plant. And we're already hearing from Casey that this is a case even close to home, right? So now, on top of this, we have the increase in actual plants where there were none before, and this people could not. So if you can observe the animation here, we are adding, okay, it's like additional constellation of 3 companies in here, right? There is like companies in France, more companies in Japan that we've seen before, a company in Australia that we are going to see. I'm refraining from naming the companies now. This is one of our pledges. As long as I were producing whatever I've learned from my personal field trips and I had license from the companies, oh, you can share this information. I was. But now with the survey, we pledged that we are not going to share any information that could be traced to individual company. We aggregate our data, and this is how we hope we build trust for better turnout for this next survey. So now, related to the volumes being produced, press types. There is no standard regarding the panel size or the press size, although you can clearly see some sweet spot emerging in the press width, length. This is somewhat limited. You see the sharp drop-off in here. There is a limit to what you can legally put on a highway without paying premium, right? So this is what is limiting the industry. However, if you have larger press, you can always cut things to smaller pieces. And it with slow curing, cold curing adhesives, it makes sense to make larger panels that, and then as Nick was explaining, just cut them to baby panels. Now the types of presses, we are going to discuss it in here. So most of these are regular hydraulic presses. Many of them do it yourself. This is before the hardware manufacturers catch on and say, wow, this is business in here, right, to be made. So in many of plants, you would see ingenious home-built large capacity presses. Some of them inaccessible. There is one company that would not even allow me to be in the same room with the press. I didn't see it. They never discussed the principle of how this press works. And I'm not naming this company, right? And then would be like a slice of pneumatic, a surprisingly large margin of vacuum presses. That prior to this survey, I thought this is like a footnote. This happened sometime in the development. No, there are many companies that are pressing those and sending to structures, and other. And the other is the biggest blunder of the previous survey. So here we go through the visuals of this, right? The hydraulic presses include 3 plants that I know of, and there may be more, that have radio frequency presses where you can cure your adhesive, and then shorten the turnaround. I know that at least one is going to be installed in States pretty soon, so this is an interesting development to observe. And then this goes with the adhesives being used. Now, this does not reflect the volumes produced, but just the number of plants installed, right? By volumes, it would be close to 95% of PUR. So now to the blender. Of course, we missed the non-binder, no nailless CLT. This is an operation. I mean, it's so unique, and they are so public with this that I will name this. It's a company in Utah, Euclid Lumber, and they do this kind of self-locking thing. How they do it? This is one of the companies that also would not like me to see the process, but they say next time, like you're in Utah, come over, we'll show you. Then there is the Dowel Bonded Clt. It's different from the Dowel laminated lumber that you may have heard about in the presentation of the name of the company is escaping me. Yes, StructureCraft. Thank you very much. But the greatest omission is this: Massiv Holzmauer. This is from German. It would be like massive wood wall. This is a nail laminated cross product with aluminum fluted nails that go through just 1.5 layer. This technology is licensed by a single company, by Handegger. And they provide the manufacturing line and the very easy licensing agreement. So here's the omission. So these are the CLT manufacturing plants that we knew of. Now, when you add 36 licensees of this, it's like changing the landscape. And then, according to Hans Handegger, right, the capacity of this plant is about 20,000 cubic meters a year. Well, I've seen one of the plants going, running actually production. It does not look like they're hitting this volume. But Handegger swears this is the potential. The potential for this type of production is about 720,000 cubic meters. So let's put it in the perspective. You've seen this slide, right? This would be to scale. I mean, it's not, again, don't confuse it. It's not the actual output. It's the potential according to the theoretical capacity of these plants. Curious. Now, this is much cheaper technology. One of the advantages, you don't need to rely on bonding, right? So you can treat it with virtually anything. Fire protection, bug protection, fungus repellent, whatever, right? Okay. So the next is species used. Now, this is based on the responses to our survey, so it's somewhat like narrow scope, and of course it reflects whatever is commercially available here in this alpine zone in Europe. So you can see that some of our friends from this continent did not respond very well to this specific question, right? We hope in the next iteration of the survey they will, trusting a little more about us with what we do with the data. The mode of operation. As I said, this is boutique industry that is actually priding itself on customization. So not surprisingly, 95% of the output volume goes to the special project. When you know at the time that you are pressing, not only for whom, for what project, but where your panel is going to end up in the building. There's only a slim margin of about 5% of the volume that the companies declare that they sell as blank panels. Now, this again coming from the survey. responses may not be representative for the entire industry, but it looks like about 85% of the current production is easily within the limits of current codes. You can build large buildings that are not tall. Large means, you have 3 dimensions to it. Next thing is, the big thing is the vertical integration. So these are, again, responses from the companies that we've asked these questions. The bars here, again, reflect the volume of production. I think this is a little more interesting perspective on the responses than the number of companies responding that way, which you can still see in here. And you will see that the quite large number, quite large volume represented in here has actually their own forest lands. And the log transportation and lumber manufacturing and lumber transportation and building engineering and CLT transportation, I mean, they own this thing, not only partner, right, with companies that they can trust to do it for them. This is interesting. So based on this and for the publication, I cobbled something like this. This is like engineer's idea of how a supply chain looks like, right? This honeycomb, just easy visually. Now, between the publication and now, I had to extend it to by, quite a number of these hexagons, and I'll comment on a couple of them. But the addition of the preservative treatments and preservative magic that can happen. This is not part of the integrated part. This is just saying this is the zone, the aura, the environment in which the CLT industry operates, and which by extension become part of this. Now, about the preservative treatments, we often miss something in here. This is the infamous termite belt, right? I'm focusing just on one of the durability problems, right? Now, we miss the fact that lots of the original manufacturing develop just north of it. The new markets, sorry guys, we will have to face it sooner or later, right? The industry. So it's good to think about it that way. Now, the models of how the companies are actually integrated vertically, I mean, which part of the supply chain they actually own or incorporate in their organization, this would look like this. This would be a traditional model for many forest product industries, right? You just vertically integrate with your green chain, and then your product just magically disappears from your yard, right? You don't care where. Now, for CLT, this is like compilation. Non-single company, except for Catera, who seems to be like bent to mark each and every of these hexagons, right? And I may be actually quite close to this. But none of the existing companies covers it that way. But these are elements that collectively we see integrated in, well, of course, none of them is or will soon produce their own adhesives, right? Or preservative treatment goo, probably will not be developing their own software. Who knows, right? So we have these things out. Now, about the true models, one of the most popular is between the architectural design, engineering, and true manufacturing, processing, transportation to construction. This seems to be like a pattern and a staple in here. Now, another model, and this is actually these 3 companies, but with quite large collective volume output. These are those that incorporate this green chain as well. And we see an emergence of companies that do not produce their own CLT. They buy blanks, although you need to be careful. It's not like commodity. They do not go to Home Depot and buy. They order the blanks to certain external dimensions and then cut it on their own. But they represent this 5% in here of the global output. It may change somewhat if the land lease, as they announce, is going to pull through the processing plant in Australia, right? Processing everything that comes in. Whether this is a trend that is going to continue and grow, I don't know. This reflects one important thing. What happened here? Oh, okay. One way of phrasing this would be, this is a move towards mass customization. It's a constant theme in here. So forest industry used to be like, you either craft something, some beautiful objects, one of a kind, or you do the commodity. Now, the level of integration that robotics and engineering brilliance allow us to do, allows us to mass produce the custom thing. If you think of typical arrangement of a CLT manufacturer with CNC machine, essentially, unless you're just cutting on the perimeter, it takes the same amount of time if you are processing 100 pieces of the same type with the same openings, or 100 pieces where each piece would be different. And what happened out of necessity now becomes a strength that the companies perceive as the competitive advantage. So let's see. Let's start with the perceived barriers. This would not be a surprise for you. Most of the companies interviewed, the scale here reflects the importance, the relative importance. So it's not number of companies that responded. Eric Hansen is over there. He can explain to you the minutiae of this. I'm not a trade person, but I have lots of manufacturing people on the team, and I can rely on their brilliance and expertise. Now, the next would be architectural community, and this actually complaint goes both ways. Some being reluctant to adapt or not familiar with, others being too cocky and trying to put it in places that it does not belong, right? So this is the complaint. But the education is going on, and I think the communities are finding more and more common language. And plus the vertical integration means that more and more of the architects are being part of the companies that are manufacturing, so they have intimate knowledge of the industry and its capacities. Now, the perceived competitive advantage, and if you look at it, many of these items actually go back to the vertical integration. So let's do the laundry list. Well, custom products, right? Now, partnerships, then dealing directly with customers, right? Well, commodity manufacturers do not do that, right? They just send the product to the market and it just disappears. So building channels for so they're actually doing this. Processing technology, information technology that makes it possible to use one platform like the BIM from architectural first drawings and drafts to the assembly on the construction site, right? So many of these advantages or perceived competitive advantages speak to the value that they see in what happened by accident and by necessity, because at first nobody knew how to build with this thing. So they had to either explain, as Nick is proposing, right? Explain to the clients, or decide, heck with this, I'm going to do it myself, right? And I'm hire smart people to do it for me. Now, I have the least to say about this, because this is Eric's, but this is the innovativeness, approach to innovativeness. I'm being told, and Eric is happy to explain in question and answer, that most of the forest product industry see their innovativeness here in the process, right? So there is some uniqueness to CLT industry, actually valuing the product more than an innovation in the product more than the other stuff. Now, do we still have time, or should I skip things? So I'm not going to do a detailed report of what we've seen, but just the motivation behind this targeted regional market tours. So essentially, you observe that we are not the only late bloomer in here, right? There are other places, and we've targeted these markets like France and Japan, that were late in adopting this. They were not part of this organic development, the growth, the evolution in the original area in Central Europe. And there are certain disadvantages. There's some catching up with this. There are similar problems and barriers. And we thought it would be good to take a look at them and see how they cope with this. So the development timeline, this is what we are interested in, technological progress and implementation, what was driving this, factors influencing market development that include like their perception of risks and challenges that are different than in the organic growth area, barriers and incentives. And this is in a nutshell. I'm going to just see for France, this is a market that is operating in an environment that's just next door to something going on in here, right? So their motivation was somewhat different. They saw actually influx of the foreign CLT, foreign companies building, and they realized, you know what, the threshold, particularly for the glulam manufacturers, the threshold for entering is not that high. And they noticed that French population is quite open for solutions that are green, environmentally sound, and so on. And they actually noticed that the foreign actors started the CLT Association of France for them. So it was just as easy as joining, right? I'm going to skip those and go to the motivations for the other. So now Pacific Rim tour. We used to believe that there are like just 3 CLT manufacturers in Japan. Guess what? There are 8 or 7, depending on how you count. Not all created equal. It's like interesting development, right? Now, I don't read much Japanese, but even without this, you can read CLT, CLT, and that it's nice, right? So, again, amazing diversity even within the same market, right? So there is definitely, we are anticipating a very interesting tour out there. And New Zealand, this is going to, Australia and New Zealand is going to be even more interesting with the new announcement just this week, right? They might have learned about this meeting in here. They just timed it properly. So this is a summary in the flight. The organic development in Europe did not lead to any convergence towards just one way of doing things, but rather cultivated the surprising diversity, right? And this diversity is plant capacities, ownership. It ranges from ma and pa shops to large corporations owning this as part of their business, manufacturing processes, level of automation. All of this vary greatly. Press type, sizes. There is no size standard, as I said. The adhesive systems or non-adhesive systems, the nails, right? Aluminum nails. Most companies integrate vertically. And they practice mass customization. This is a fact. It's not a science fiction. They actually see the competitive advantage, and you see newcomer to this industry, Catera, making a very strong statement around this. And MHM being this ugly duckling, perhaps, I don't know. Something is going on in here we want to learn more about. 25 years in development, the industry still feels very young. And I explained to you what I mean. Does not mean immature, but still searching for, and perhaps it's never going to converge to one thing, because this is the beauty of custom-based industry. If you're custom manufacturing something, if your final product is a building, of course every project will be different, every niche will be different, every time you do it will be different. You can do it in many different ways. I was asked to alert you that there is SWST meeting in Japan coming up, and this is moving towards related questions. Sorry for taking more time.